In the Shadow of Secrets, Part 5, The Crossroads. The hours dragged on after receiving Bashar's message. John's mind was a battleground of conflicting emotions, each pulling him in a different direction. The weight of the decision was almost unbearable. Bashar had laid everything out on the table, but the cost of taking that step into the unknown was daunting. If he walked away, would he be turning his back on the truth? If he stayed, would he be complicit in a game of deception far darker than he ever imagined? As the clock ticked closer to midnight, John knew there was no turning back. The decision had to be made tonight. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Anna. "We need to talk tomorrow. You're being watched." It was a stark reminder that the walls were closing in, that there were eyes on him no matter what he chose to do. The embassy, with all its promises of safety and order, had become a web of lies and manipulation. Anna's cryptic message only solidified the sense of entrapment he'd been feeling for days. He pulled on his jacket and stepped out into the cool Damascus night, his breath misting in the air. The city felt different now, darker, more oppressive. It was as though the weight of his decisions had already begun to warp everything around him. The once vibrant streets now seemed full of shadow, the quiet whispers of danger lurking in every corner. As he made his way toward the cafe near Al-Hamidiyya Souk, where he had met Bashar before, the street seemed empty, almost too quiet. John's heart thudded in his chest, each step echoing in his ears. The choice was inescapable now. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that the facade of diplomacy and control still held any meaning. The world was unraveling, and he was in the middle of it, unable to ignore it any longer. When he arrived, Bashar was already waiting for him in the same corner of the cafe. This time, there was no smile, no teasing remark. Bashar's face was etched with tension, his eyes scanning the room as though constantly looking over his shoulder. "John," he said, his voice low, urgent. "You came?" "I had to," John replied, sitting down across from him. "What's going on? What do you want from me?" Bashar's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I'm not asking you to do anything you don't want to, but if you're going to walk away from this, you need to understand what you're walking into. You're already in it, whether you know it or not." John felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" "There's a plan," Bashar said, leaning forward, his eyes never leaving John's. "A plan to destabilize Syria further. They're using the media to push an agenda, and they're using us, journalists, photographers, people like me, to create a narrative that suits their needs. But it's more than just Syria. It's bigger than that. This operation, this deadlock, it's all part of something much larger. And it's about control, about creating chaos and manipulating the truth." John's mind was racing. Everything he thought he knew about the situation was suddenly in question. The stories that had been fed to the public, the headlines that had dominated the news, were they all lies? Were they part of a larger scheme orchestrated by his own government? "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" John asked, frustration bubbling to the surface. Bashar sighed, his fingers drumming on the table. I couldn't trust anyone, but now I'm asking you to trust me. I need your help, John. There's still time to stop this, but we have to act fast." John felt the gravity of Bashar's words settle on him. The weight of the choice hung over him like a storm cloud. Could he really walk away from the embassy? From the life he had worked so hard to build? Or was he already too far gone, caught in a web of deceit and manipulation, unable to return to the innocence he once had? "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Bashar leaned back in his chair, his eyes hardening. "I need you to help me expose the operation. I can't do it alone. You've seen the file. You know what's going on. The people running the operation, they're too powerful for me to take on alone. But with your access, with your position at the embassy, we have a chance." John nodded slowly, the decision already beginning to take shape in his mind. It was no longer a question of loyalty to the embassy. It was a question of what was right. He had joined the diplomatic service to make a difference, to help bring peace. But now, he realized, the truth was the only thing that could save him from becoming a part of the lie. "I'm in," John said, the words tasting like steel on his tongue. "What's the plan?" The following days were a blur of covert meetings and whispered conversations, each one drawing John deeper into the heart of the conspiracy. Bashar guided him through the labyrinth of contacts and hidden alliances, showing him the pieces of the puzzle he hadn't seen before. The operation was far-reaching, its tendrils stretching into every corner of the Syrian conflict. And the embassy, his embassy, was right at the center of it. But there were others watching too. Anna had become more distant, her interactions with John more formal and strained. He knew she was aware that something was happening, but he didn't know how much she knew. The tension between them was palpable, and it felt as though the walls were closing in faster with each passing day. It wasn't long before John received another message from Bashar. "We have a window. Meet me tomorrow. It's time." The next night, John found himself standing outside a rundown building in the heart of Damascus. It was the place where Bashar had arranged to meet him. But as he approached, something didn't feel right. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and the shadows seemed darker than usual. Before he could step inside, a figure emerged from the doorway. It was Anna. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with the weight of secrets she hadn't shared. "John," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." End of Part 5. In the Shadow of Secrets, Part 6, Betrayal and Allegiance. John's heart skipped a beat as Anna stepped into the dim light of the street lamp, her face a mix of exhaustion and something else, something darker. She looked at him like she was seeing a ghost, her expression unreadable, as if every step she had taken toward him had been part of a larger plan she had no control over. "You shouldn't be here," John said, his voice sharp, though his chest tightened with 1,000 unspoken questions. "I'm meeting Bashar. This place, it's not safe." Anna stepped closer, her eyes flicking nervously around them before settling back on him. "I know. That's why I'm here, John, to warn you." He raised an eyebrow, confusion washing over him. "Warn me? About what?" She looked over her shoulder again, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's all a setup, John. Bashar, he's not who you think he is." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. "What are you talking about?" John demanded, the growing unease in his gut twisting into something darker. "I saw the file. I know what's going on. This isn't just about Syria, Anna. It's bigger than that." Anna's eyes flickered with a momentary hesitation, as if she had to choose her next words carefully. "Bashar isn't just a journalist. He's been working for a different agenda. He's been playing both sides." John stepped back, his mind reeling. "No, he can't be. He's shown me the truth. Everything he said, it makes sense. It all lines up with what I've uncovered." "You've only seen half of it," Anna said quickly, her voice rising in urgency. "The truth is, not what you think. I've been trying to protect you, John, from the people who would use you to further their own ends." He shook his head in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen? After everything you've told me?" Anna's gaze softened, and for the first time in weeks, John saw the person he had once trusted, the woman who had welcomed him into the fold, who had been his guide in this strange new world. But that trust was fragile now, shattered by her words, by the cracks in the system she had helped to uphold. "I didn't want this, John," Anna said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you involved in any of it. But it's too late now. Bashar has been playing a dangerous game with everyone, including you. And the people he's working for, they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." John's head spun. Was Bashar really a part of some larger, darker conspiracy? Had everything they'd shared, every moment of trust between them, been a lie? Or was Anna playing him now, twisting the truth to suit her own purposes? "You've got it wrong, Anna," he said, his voice sharp with defiance. "You're the one who's been keeping secrets. What are you really trying to protect me from? I've seen enough to know that the embassy is involved in something far worse than Bashar could ever be. Don't try to turn this on him." For a moment, Anna said nothing. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound, and met his gaze with an intensity that almost made him flinch. "I'm not turning this on him, John. I'm trying to protect you from him, from the people he's working for." John felt the cold edge of doubt creeping into his mind. If Bashar had been playing both sides, if he was a part of something darker than he'd imagined, then what did that mean for John? What did it mean for their friendship, their budding relationship? Before he could respond, Anna took a step forward, lowering her voice. "There's something you don't know. Something about the operation deadlock? The mention of the operation sent a chill through John. He had already seen parts of it, enough to know that it was far more complex and dangerous than he had initially understood. But now, the stakes seemed even higher. "Go on," John said, his voice tight. "There's an element of it that's been kept from you, a part of it that even the higher-ups don't know. The manipulation of the media, the use of journalists, it's part of something much bigger. And Bashar's role in it? He's not just a pawn, John. He's been orchestrating part of it." John recoiled. The words hit him like a hammer, smashing everything he thought he knew. "You're saying he's been using me? That he's been lying to me all along?" Anna nodded grimly. "I didn't want to believe it either, but I've seen the connections. He's been playing both sides, creating the chaos, controlling the narrative, and feeding false information to stir up conflict." John's thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. The man he had come to respect, the man he had shared his fears with, was he really just another cog in the machine of deception? But as the pieces started to fall into place, a voice in his mind whispered that there was still something he didn't understand. Bashar had always been careful. Too careful. He had given John just enough to keep him on his side, but not enough to fully reveal his intentions. Had Bashar been working a double game, or had Anna simply become too entangled in her own version of the truth? "I don't know who to trust anymore," John said, his voice hoarse. Anna reached out, her hand hovering near his arm, but never quite touching. "Trust your instincts, John. This is bigger than you think. It's bigger than us, but you can still walk away." John felt the weight of her words settle over him. Walk away. The idea of stepping back from everything, the embassy, Bashar, his life in Damascus, seemed impossible. Yet, in that moment, he understood that his next move would change everything. There was no turning back. "I can't," he said, his voice stronger now. "I can't walk away. Not when I've seen what's at stake." Anna's face hardened, but there was a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Then you're making a mistake." Before John could say anything more, Anna turned and disappeared into the night, her figure swallowed by the shadows. He stood there for a long moment, his thoughts swirling in a storm of confusion, anger, and fear. Finally, John made up his mind. He wasn't going to let the truth slip away, not when so much was at stake, but he would have to confront Bashar. The man who had shown him the truth was the same man who might have been hiding more than John could ever imagine. The following night, John met Bashar at their usual spot in the city. The moment he stepped into the cafe, his eyes found Bashar's immediately. But there was something different in his expression now, a flicker of something that John hadn't seen before. Wariness, guilt. "You came," Bashar said. His voice steady, but his eyes betraying a hint of tension. "I need answers, Bashar," John said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know you've been hiding things from me. I need to know the truth. Now." Bashar's gaze darkened, but he didn't back away. "I told you before, John. Sometimes the truth is more than you can handle." John leaned forward, his jaw tight. "I'm handling it, but I need to know everything." Bashar sighed, as if the weight of the moment had finally come to rest on his shoulders. "All right. You want the truth? Here it is." End of Part 6. In the Shadow of Secrets. Part 7. The Unraveling. The air in the cafe seemed to thicken as Bashar stared at John, his face clouded with the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. John could feel the tension rising, the moment of truth finally upon him. His mind raced as he waited for Bashar to speak, the silence between them stretching long enough to feel like a chasm. "I didn't want you involved, John," Bashar said finally, his voice rough, as if the confession had been caught in his throat for too long. "But now that you are, there's no turning back. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for what I've done, but you deserve to know." John's stomach tightened. He had never seen Bashar so vulnerable, so unguarded. This was the man who had been his closest ally in Damascus, who had shared his knowledge and risks with him, and now it seemed all of it had been part of a far larger and more sinister game. "I've been working for the government," Bashar continued, his gaze never leaving John's, "but not the one you think. The Syrian government is just a pawn in the game. I've been feeding information to both sides, the government here, the rebels, and people outside Syria who are trying to push their own agendas. The truth you've seen, the files you've been given, it's all part of a carefully curated narrative. And you've been playing your part, whether you knew it or not. John's mind was reeling. Everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, was suddenly in question. "What do you mean I've been playing my part?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. "I thought you were the one helping me expose the truth, but now you're telling me that everything has been manipulated, that I've been used." Bashar's face darkened, guilt and shame flashing in his eyes. "Yes, I'm sorry, John. I thought I could control the narrative. I thought I could use the situation to my advantage, to stop the war, to bring about a different kind of peace. But it got out of hand. There are forces here, in the Middle East, in Europe, who want nothing but destruction. They're pulling strings, making people like you and me do things we can't undo." John's chest tightened with anger and confusion. "But why me? Why involve me in this? I trusted you, Bashar. I thought you were different." Bashar ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I didn't want you to get involved, John. You were just supposed to help me gather information. But then I saw you, saw how you wanted to make a difference, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, you could help turn the tide. But you were always just a pawn in a much larger game." John stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound. "I don't know if I can trust anything you say anymore," he spat, his voice thick with emotion. "How am I supposed to believe you now? After everything?" Bashar looked up at him, his eyes pleading. "You have to believe me, John. It's the only way out. There's a way to stop this, but we have to expose the entire operation. And I need your help to do it." John paused, his body tense, caught between the desire to run and the pull of something deeper, something that still resonated with the man he had come to know. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady, though his heart was still pounding in his chest. Bashar nodded, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "The Operation Deadlock is a cover for something far bigger than you can imagine. It's an effort to destabilize the region, to create chaos that serves those who want power. The journalists, the photographers, even the diplomats, they're all being used to push a false narrative. But the truth is that the real agenda is far more dangerous." John's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information that had been scattered before him over the past few weeks. The more he heard, the less he understood. But there was one thing that kept coming back to him. Anna. Anna had said something similar, but she had her own agenda, her own secrets. "Who's behind this?" John asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "Who's pulling the strings? Who's manipulating all of us?" Bashar's gaze faltered, his eyes dropping for a brief moment, as though he was weighing whether or not to say more. Then, with a final heavy sigh, he spoke. "It's not just one group, it's a coalition, an international alliance that includes factions from Europe, the Middle East, and the US. They've been manipulating the conflict for years, pushing different parties into an endless cycle of war and distrust. They want control, John. Control over the region's resources, its influence, its future." John's mind reeled with the enormity of what Bashar was saying. These were forces beyond anything he had ever imagined, powers that stretched across borders, that manipulated events on a scale he couldn't begin to grasp. "So, what do we do now?" John asked, his voice quieter, almost resigned. Bashar's eyes hardened, a new determination in his gaze. "We expose them, but we need proof. Real, undeniable proof that ties everyone together. The governments, the corporations, the intelligence agencies, and once we have that, we can bring them down. Together." John felt the weight of Bashar's words settle heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't sure how to respond, how to even begin thinking about what it would take to bring such a powerful conspiracy into the light. But one thing was clear. Bashar wasn't lying. The world was more complicated than he had ever known. And now, there was no going back. "You've got one chance to prove this to me," John said finally, his voice low but resolute. "One chance. And if I find out you've been lying to me..." Bashar nodded quickly, his eyes filled with an intensity that was almost frantic. "I won't let you down. I swear, John. We can stop this." John didn't respond immediately. His mind was racing, every thought leading him further into the storm that had been gathering around him for months. The risks were immense, the stakes were higher than ever, and now his future was tangled in a web of secrets that only continued to unravel with each passing day. But there was no turning back now. Bashar had pulled him into this world, and there was no way out except through the heart of it. John stood up, his resolve hardening. All right, let's do it. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation and tension. John and Bashar worked in secret, gathering evidence, making contact with people they could trust, though the list was growing dangerously short. Every moment felt like they were walking a razor-thin edge, trying to expose the operation, while avoiding the watchful eyes of those who would stop them at any cost. But it wasn't long before John received another message. This time, it wasn't from Bashar. It was from Anna. I know what you're doing. You're making a mistake. Meet me now. End of Part 7. In the Shadow of Secrets, Part 8, The Crossroads. John's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he barely needed to glance at the screen to know it was Anna. He had been expecting this, her warning, her attempt to pull him back from the brink. He had been walking a fine line for days, with Bashar on one side, Anna on the other, and the dangerous game they were playing growing more complex with each passing hour. He had tried to distance himself from the chaos, but every decision pulled him deeper into it. He stared at the message for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. I know what you're doing. You're making a mistake. Meet me now. The words felt like a threat, but not the kind he expected. It wasn't the threat of violence. It was the kind of threat that twisted the truth until it was unrecognizable, the kind that made you question everything you had fought for. John knew what he had to do. He had to meet her. The secret she was hiding had always been at the heart of everything that had gone wrong in his life here in Damascus. The truth was buried in the choices they had both made, and it was time to confront it head-on. When he arrived at the rendezvous point, a small, quiet cafe near the edge of the city, far from the prying eyes of the embassy and the war zone, Anna was already there. She sat alone at a corner table, her expression unreadable, her eyes fixed on the cup in front of her, fingers nervously tracing the edge of the porcelain. John hesitated before approaching, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of them easy. He had trusted Anna once, but after everything that had happened, he wasn't sure if trust was something he could afford anymore. Anna, he said softly, as he sat down opposite her. His voice carried a weight of weariness, of the burden of knowing too much, too soon. She looked up, her face tired but determined, the faintest trace of regret in her eyes. You came. Of course I came, he replied, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. But I need answers, Anna. I've had enough of the lies. I need to know why you did all of this, why you've been keeping secrets from me. Anna's eyes flickered to the side, as if considering how much to say, how much to reveal. It's not what you think, John. I never wanted you to be involved in any of this. Then why did you pull me in? John pressed, frustration boiling beneath his calm exterior. Why did you bring me here? Let me think I was helping uncover something. If all it was doing was feeding into a bigger game? Anna's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together on the table. You have to understand, I had no choice. The operation we're dealing with, deadlock. It wasn't just about surveillance. It's about control. People have been using this conflict for their own gain for years. It's all been planned, John. Every move, every piece of information. I was tasked with managing the flow of intel, creating a controlled chaos, if you will, to keep things from escalating too far, to keep the world from knowing the true extent of what was happening here. John sat back in his chair, processing her words. The pieces were finally starting to click into place. He had suspected it all along, but hearing her say it aloud, hearing the cold, calculated way she described her role in this vast, complex operation, made it all feel more real. And Bashar? John asked, leaning forward. You said he's part of it, but why? What's his involvement? Anna's expression darkened. Bashar, he's a part of the network, but unlike me, he never wanted to play it safe. He saw the bigger picture, the way people's lives were being manipulated for a larger agenda, and he wanted to use that knowledge to break the system, to expose the truth. But he didn't understand the cost. He couldn't. No one can. John felt his pulse quicken. So, you're telling me that Bashar, who I trusted, who I thought was trying to help me, is just another cog in this machine? Another player, playing his part in a much larger game? Anna nodded slowly. Yes, and no. Bashar is more dangerous than you realize, John. He has his own agenda now, one that doesn't necessarily align with anyone else's. He's out for himself, and he'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants, even if it means bringing everything down. John swallowed hard, trying to wrap his mind around what Anna was saying. But why would he pull me into this? Why would he make me believe in his cause if it was all a lie? Because you were a pawn, Anna replied, her voice colder now, as if the emotion had drained out of her. Just like I was, just like we all are. But Bashar thought that if he could make you believe in something, anything, it might give him the leverage he needed. He doesn't see people as anything more than tools to be used. That's the dangerous part about him. John felt the weight of her words sink into him like a stone, dragging him deeper into a truth he didn't want to accept. Bashar, the man he had shared his life with in this chaotic city, the man he had confided in, had he been manipulating him all along? Was their bond a lie? I don't know what to think anymore, Anna, he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. I don't know who's telling the truth. I don't know who's using me. Anna's eyes softened for the briefest of moments. John, I'm not asking you to trust me, not after everything that's happened. But if you want to get out of this, if you want to stop the chaos, you have to stop trusting Bashar. John stared at her, the confusion and pain cutting through him like a knife. And if I don't, Anna looked him straight in the eye, her expression hardening. Then you'll be just another player in their game, and they'll control you the same way they've controlled all of us. The next few hours were a blur for John. He was torn between the conflicting voices in his head, between the trust he had placed in Bashar and Anna's cold, harsh warning. He walked the streets of Damascus, unsure of where to go, unsure of who to turn to. His mind kept circling back to Anna's words. If you want to get out of this, you have to stop trusting Bashar. The weight of her warning gnawed at him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something Anna wasn't telling him. Something deeper. Something that could turn the entire situation upside down. Finally, he returned to his apartment, where the shadows felt heavier than ever before. As he opened the door, he found a single piece of paper waiting for him on the table. It was a message from Bashar. Meet me tonight. We need to talk. John's breath caught in his throat. He had come to a crossroads, and tonight would be the moment where he would have to choose his path, and the consequences of that choice would change everything. End of part C.